Hello and welcome. My name is Tino Machetta, a technology instructor for the Poughkeepsie Public Library, and this is a video for Excel 101. In this class, we're going to speak about the basics of Excel. So we're going to discuss the way the application is organized, so we know exactly what we have to click and when. We're going to talk about the mouse pointers, which are crucial for being able to perform any type of task. We're also going to make sure we know how to save our document. We'll talk about some simple formulas, and we'll work on a project where we create an annual budget. Now, the first thing I want to make clear is that Excel is not as hard as people make it out to be. I'm definitely not saying that it's easy, but the trick here is that it's technical, it's detailed. Now, that may sound hard, but technical and detailed really just means a lot of little things. And if you can get a grasp of the little things, you can do the more complicated things. This is the one class where people have walked in a little intimidated at times. So I want to say that first and foremost. I always make sure that I make that clear before we even begin, that this isn't necessarily going to be an easy class, but it's not necessarily as hard as you might think it is. We're going to break down all the important elements that need to be discussed, and by the end of the video you should be able to work pretty comfortably with Excel to do basic things. Before we begin, I want everyone to be aware of what kind of application Excel is. Excel is part of Microsoft Office, which is a collection of applications that can be used for home and for business. So if I wanted to write a letter, for example, I would open up Microsoft Word and I would be able to type my letter in there. If I want to create some type of presentation, I would have a number of slides that I could put together in Microsoft PowerPoint. Similarly, we have Microsoft Excel, which is part of that collection, that's really good for entering data and being able to do lots of calculations with formulas. So let's jump right into Excel. The easiest way to do this is to grab our mouse and to move our cursor down to the bottom left of the screen where our Windows button is. Click on that, and you should be able to see a whole list of applications here, and they're sorted alphabetically. So for me, I have Excel right here. It's right under the E, but if you don't have that, you can always just start typing. You don't have to click on anything. You can just start typing EXCEL, and Excel will come up. Now, in either event, whether you have to search for it or if it's already visible, all you have to do is go to where Excel is, right here, and then just click on it, and it starts up for us. Now what we're going to do is we're going to click on Blank Workbook, our very first option, single click on that, and now we're in Excel. So the important thing here is to know exactly what we're looking at. There's a lot of things on the screen, but as I mentioned, it's just details. It's just things that need to be broken down so we can understand what they are. Now the very first thing I want everyone to look at is all the way over in the top left hand of the screen. This is called the Quick Access Toolbar, and it's the smallest but probably most important thing that Excel has. This is where we can save our file, and we can undo and redo anything. So if we make a mistake, not a big deal. We just click our undo button. If you want to do what we just did a second time, we can just click the redo button. I encourage you to save often because you don't want to lose your work. Now we're going to skip over this part here. This is called the ribbon. We're going to talk about this in detail a little bit later. And we're going to go down to the actual worksheet itself. Now there's a few things here we need to talk about. All the way on the right hand side, we have our scroll bar. Now you can move up and down by clicking onto it and dragging up and down. That'll move the rows up and down accordingly. You can also click on the arrows to move down or up. If you need to get a little closer and look at these individual cells in any particular detail, you can go over here to the bottom right where the zoom bar is. And you can see right now we're at 100%. You could always increase that by clicking on the plus sign. And you can see it makes our sheet a little bit bigger, but we could always make things smaller too. We just click on that minus sign, right? And if we want to go back to normal, of course, we can go back to 100% by clicking plus until we get to 100. Another important part of Excel is the status bar. And that's right here on the bottom left-hand side. So we start off with sheet 1. That's the default sheet. It's pretty much just a blank name that we can change at some point if we want to. And it'll show us if we do have multiple sheets, what they are, and they'll all exist right here. But right now we just have our one sheet by default. And then we can talk about the sheet itself, the actual worksheet that's right in front of us, this big grid-like structure. Well, we have a whole bunch of columns here that are separated by letter, and we have a whole bunch of rows here that are separated by number. And any place you click with your mouse will select a particular cell, and it's named by letter and by number. So I just kind of randomly clicked here, and I'm on E12. Now if there's any doubt which cell you're on, you can always go over here to the name box. This will tell you exactly what you clicked on. So if I move, say, to over here, it changes to B1, and that makes sense. Here's my B, here's my 1, right? The other thing of note is the formula bar, which is right here. The name is a bit misleading because, yes, formulas do go there, but anything can go there. So if I just type the letter A, for example, that's not a formula. That's just the letter A, and the letter A appears in the formula bar. So yes, it does show formulas, but really it shows whatever is in the cell that you've selected. And that'll come in handy a little bit later. And now we can talk about the ribbon. Now our ribbon is located on the top of the screen, and it goes horizontally across the application. Depending on which tab we select on top, we'll have different items featured in the ribbon. So for example, under our Home tab, we have a lot of very important things that we can use. We have our cut, copy, and paste options. We have our font group, which allows us to take any of the content in a cell and make it bold, italicize it, underline it. We can change our font, change the font size. Later when we work on our budget, we're going to deal with dollar amounts, but because of our number group, we don't have to actually type in a $sign. It'll do that for us. So we'll know we're going to work with money, but it's only when we start formatting our budget will we actually include any of these $signs. All that will be formatted for us with a couple of quick clicks. So now we can go to our Insert tab, and you can see how our ribbon changes accordingly. This is good for being able to insert charts, insert pictures, things of that nature. We can also click on our Formulas tab. Now they did a good job of grouping all the different types of formulas that exist in Excel. There's over 400 of them. We're definitely not going to use them all. In this class we're going to keep it very simple. But if you do need them, they are all here. And yeah, like I said, as we move on, we'll be able to use different portions of the ribbon by clicking on the different tabs. They all have their place, but we're pretty much going to stick here for the first class, the Home tab. This has pretty much everything we need, including our auto sum. That's something else that we're going to use when we start doing our calculations. Now, one of the most difficult parts of Excel are the various mouse pointers. And I can see why there's confusion with them. Looking at them doesn't make it terribly obvious what their purpose is. So I want to start off by going through a few of them just so that we can familiarize ourselves with what they look like and what we can do with them. Because a lot of the functionality that comes from Excel stems from our ability to use the mouse in a strategic way. So first and foremost, we'll start with the easy one, the select pointer. Now that's the default one. If I have my mouse anywhere in the worksheet itself, you can see a big white plus sign. And the name is obvious enough. It's used to select one or more cells. So I can just come by and left click, and I selected that cell. Click again, now I've selected that cell. Now if I want to select multiple cells, I'm pretty much doing the same thing, except I'm going to left click again, but I'm going to hold down the left mouse button, and then I'm going to drag to where I want. Now this kind of thing is very good if there's a lot of data that you want to format all at once. So if I want to make all of this bold, or if I want to change, the font size, for example, I don't have to do it one cell at a time. I can just group a large number of them and do it all at once. The second one that I want to discuss is the autofill. Now this is very good because if you had to do certain tasks in Excel manually, and by that I mean enter them one cell at a time, it could take you a very, very long time to complete that task, and there's a chance that you'll make an error. Now, for example, if I say I want to fill in the first 10 numbers, right? Well, what I can do is I can go over to cell A1, right? So I'll use my select pointer, click on cell A1, and I can come along and I can type the number 1 and then hit enter. And that drops me down to cell A2. I can then type the number 2 and then hit enter. And I can continue on and on and on until I finally fill in cell number 10. Now, that's not too bad. But what if it were 20 numbers? What if it were 100 numbers? What if it's 1,000 numbers? Not only is that going to take you a very long time to get through, there's a chance you're just going to skip a number here and there. Just simple human error. Well, there's a better way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit my undo button 3 times, get rid of that. Well, the question is, what kind of information do we have to give Excel such that it knows what we're trying to do? Our goal is to try to autocomplete or autofill the first 10 numbers and have them appear right here in column A. So what kind of information do we have to give it? Well, let's see. So if we just make sure A1 is selected and give it the number 1, let's see if that's enough. Let's see if it understands what we're trying to do here. Now, how do we autofill? Well, you can see right here that cell A1 is selected. You can see because there's a green outline around the cell. And if we go specifically to the bottom right of that cell, you'll see our big white plus sign turn into a smaller black plus sign. Now that means that we're in position to autofill, and all we have to do is left click the mouse button and drag down. So I'm going to drag down to the 10th cell and let go, and we're almost there. We just have the number 1 repeated over and over again. Now that's not a bad thing, but it's not what we want. We want the first 10 numbers in a row. Well, that means that we just didn't give Excel enough information. All right, not a big deal, but it did autofill, just not what we wanted. So I'm going to hit the undo button and go back to my number 1 here. And I'm just going to give it one more. I'm going to click on cell A2 and give it the number 2. So now the question is, are the first 2 numbers enough? Well, let's find out. Now, this is going to be a little different because we're not just clicking on the first number or the second one and then getting to our autofill. Having the numbers here is not enough. We have to actually use our select pointer and select the first 2 cells by clicking on the first one and dragging down to the second one. Now, it may not look like the first one is selected because it's white, but it is. The first one will be white, and then subsequent cells that you select will be gray. So these 2 are selected, and you can see that there's a green box around both of them. So both of these cells are selected. Now we have to do that first because that is the information that Excel is going to use to do the autofill. So now we can do the same thing. Now that we have both cells selected, we can go to the bottom right of cell A2, right where the number 2 is, and get our little black plus sign. Now with that, it's using both of those pieces of information to try to fill in that pattern. So we have 1 and 2. Now I'm going to left click with my mouse. I'm going to hold that, and then I'm going to drag down to the 10th row. There we go. So with 2 pieces of information, it was able to fill in those 10 numbers. So with numbers, that seems to be the way it goes. In fact, we can just keep going with that and just keep clicking and dragging down, and it'll just keep on autofilling. So very convenient, because if you needed to do that for just 50 numbers, imagine having to do that one at a time versus just putting in the number 1 and 2, selecting them, and then autofilling all the way down. It just takes a matter of seconds, and there won't be any mistakes. Now, that's not the only thing that can be autofilled. You'll see later when we work on our project, our budget, we need to deal with things like months. Maybe you'll have another project where you have to work on days of the week. Both of those are very easy to do. In fact, for them, you really only need one piece of information. So I'm going to go over to an empty cell. I'm going to go to C1, and let's just do the days of the week. So I'm going to type Monday. And again, I'm going to autofill by going to the bottom right of that cell. I'm going to get my little black plus sign, and this time I'm going to drag across instead of down. It doesn't make any difference. I'm going to click with my left mouse, and I'm going to drag across. And you can see Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday appear. So that's pretty straightforward, and it works the same exact way with months. So if I go over to cell C2, right below Monday, and I type January, I can then go over to the bottom right again, get my little black plus, and click and drag either across or down, and you can see the 12 months autofill. You just have to type the first one. Now, another type of pointer is the type or edit pointer. That's something that comes into play when we use the formula bar. And you can see right away it immediately changes from our plus sign to, looks like a capital I. Now that's really important if you want to get into a very specific part of the cell. So in this case I have January C2 selected, so January appears here. Now if I want to do any editing, I can just go in and click exactly where I want to. Now, for example, say I want to just abbreviate this to JAN. I can do that by clicking at the end of January, right where the Y is, right after it, and just backspace so that it says Jan. Right? Now, this autofill is very good because Jan is a person's name. Yet when I go over here to the bottom right and autofill that, it does the same thing it did before, but just with an abbreviated version of the months. It just goes right over it. Now, keeping that in mind, yes, you can edit with the edit pointer, and there's times when you do want to do that, but if you just want to type over something, that'll work just as well. So for example, if I wanted to edit the days of the week here, I don't have to click on C1 for Monday and then use that edit pointer. I can, but if I wanted to make that lowercase, say MON for whatever reason, I can just do that and then go back to my autofill, and it knows to copy that exact pattern, which is very convenient. So remember, you can use the edit pointer if you want up on top where the formula bar is. But if you're just editing simple text or numbers, you really can just click on the cell that you want in particular and just type right over it, and you've now overwritten that material. Just note you don't get any warning whatsoever with this. We're clearly writing over where data already exists, and we receive no notification, no warning. Hey, be careful, you're potentially deleting important information. Excel doesn't do that at all in this case. So that's very nice if you know what you're doing and you say, hey, I don't care, I just want to get rid of this particular section and type over it with other material. Fair enough. But if you're not paying attention, you may lose something very important. So just be a little careful with that, because you can see how powerful of a tool this is. So that can work for you or it can work against you. Now the next pointer I want to talk about, there's a pair of them. It's the select column and select row pointers. The same way we can use our select pointer, the big white plus sign, to click and drag and select multiple cells. Well, we can do the same thing with an entire column or an entire row. Now, if you remember, for the columns, there's about 65,000 total. And for the rows, there's 1,048,000 and some odd rows to deal with. Now, I do not want, under any circumstances, to have to click and drag across for 65,000 individual cells or 1,048,000 individual cells in order to do some basic formatting, like make everything bold, for example. That's going to take forever. So thankfully there's a shortcut. The first one we're going to do is our select column pointer. Now this is pretty straightforward. Our columns are on top. It's all the ones with the letters. So say I wanted to select everything in column A. Yes, I can start at the top, click and drag down, keep on going, but you can see that's going to take a while if there's over 1 million of them. Instead, what I can do is I can just aim my pointer at the letter itself, and you can see how it changes to a downward facing arrow. And now all I have to do is left click. And with that one click of the button, I've now selected every single cell in that column. So with that, maybe I want to make everything in that column bold. Fair enough. I just come over to my B for bold on my home tab and click on that, and I've made every single cell bold. And that even includes down here, you could see cell 38 doesn't have any content in it, but if I type that 38 in, it shows up bold. So I'm formatting the cell, not necessarily what's in it, so that even if the cell is blank, when I put something in there, it will then be affected. It'll be whatever I click on top, whatever I format it to be. Now that same pointer, that downward facing arrow that works for columns, it'll also work for a row. So if I click on row 2, when I have now a right-facing pointer and do the same thing, I've now selected every single cell in that particular row. And maybe I want to go and turn everything in there yellow. Well, I have my paint can right here for my fill color. And if I click on this, it makes every cell in that row yellow. And that even includes the ones that don't have content in them. You can see from column O across. And of course, it keeps on going. Now, we don't just want to necessarily select columns and rows. Sometimes we want to resize them. So that's the next pair of pointers I would like to discuss. If we go back to MON, Monday, and just type right over that, let's go back to Monday proper, capital M, lowercase O-N-D-A-Y, and use our autofill pointer. Get our little black plus sign on the bottom right, click and drag across. We have our 7 days of the week, and they're all pretty much okay, except you can see Wednesday is cut off right here. The other days of the week are smaller than the default size of a column, whereas Wednesday is just a little bit bigger. So it's there. If I click on Wednesday, my formula bar shows Wednesday is typed fully there, but it just doesn't display here. Well, that's okay. That's where we use our resize column. And then we're just going to do the same thing with resize row. So to resize a column, the easiest way to do this is to aim for the letter itself, and that would give us our select column. But if our goal is to make that cell just a little bit wider, I'm just going to go to the right, and you can see this, the pointer changes again to another smaller black plus sign, but it also has two arrows pointing to the left and right. Now I could do two things here. I can click and I can drag across to the right to make the column bigger, and it'll make every single cell in column E wider by that amount, by however far out I click. Or I can double click. If I double click, it'll make that column as large as the largest item that's contained in that column. So in this case, we have Wednesday and March, M-A-R. Wednesday is the largest thing, so if I simply double click, it'll expand that column E out to the end of the Y in Wednesday. So I'll double click on it, and you can see it just pushes it out exactly that far. But if I undo that, get my one pointer, slide back over again, get my select column pointer now. I'm sorry, get my resize column pointer now, just like I did before, but instead of double clicking, I'm going to single click and just drag it out. I could also do it that way and make it as wide as I want. I mean, if I want to, I really can expand that pretty far out if I want to. And of course, I could do the same thing. Get my pointer there. And then I can resize it by clicking again, but this time by shrinking it back down a little bit. Now I can do the same exact thing with the row. I can aim for my select row pointer, my black arrow that's pointing to the right, but I can go and move up just a little bit, and it turns into a similar pointer as a resize column, but instead of having the arrows point left and right, they point up and down. So I can do the same thing here. I can click and drag down, and I've made row 3 noticeably larger. Now the last pointer that I want to show you is called the move pointer. Now here I have Wednesday selected, right? Cell E1 for me. Say I wanted to move that over here somewhere. Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in to make this easier to see. So I'm going to click on my plus sign and make this a little bit larger because I want to show you the border of the cell. You can see that green outline, and we already know the autofill is in the bottom right hand side. We get that little black plus sign. In order to do anything with the move pointer, we're going to be on the border of the cell we selected, but it's going to be anywhere except for the bottom right where the autofill pointer is. So I'm going to try to trace this. It's very hard to do, but you can see as long as I go along the border of the cell, I have this little black plus sign, but it has a four-sided arrow to it. See, it's a little tricky to just trace right across. But you can see it exists all along the border here. Almost. See, it's all along here. And then I get back to the bottom right and it goes back to autofill. So anywhere but there, and then you're good to go. So if I want to move this to over here somewhere, I'm going to be on the border here, get my four-sided arrow, and I'm going to left click my mouse and then just drag over. And then where I want it to go, in this case it'll be cell K10, I'm just going to release the mouse. And it just moves it. That's simple. Now the good news is if you move it to where there's content, here you actually will get a warning. So I'm going to do it one more time. I'm going to go, say I'll do it with the top here. It doesn't matter. But I'm going to click on the border here, and I'm going to click and drag over to where there is content and let go of it. Well, I get a prompt here. There's already data here. Do you want to replace it? And if we hit cancel, it'll keep it right here where we originally had it. If I hit OK, it'll simply replace the 9. Well, that's pretty nice. We get a warning. But you can see you have to be a little bit careful with that because it could cause some trouble. Now, one final thing I would like to show you is how to select all of the cells for the entire worksheet. In fact, I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing that. Now, this is important because sometimes you want to select a whole bunch of cells with the select pointer to maybe do some formatting. Maybe you want to select an entire column. Maybe you want to select an entire row. But what if you want to change everything, all 17 billion cells? You want to change maybe the font or the font size and make some very large move like that. Well, turns out both ways are surprisingly simple. The first way is if you go all the way over to the very top left of the worksheet, just before column A, just above row 1, you'll see this little gray triangle. All you have to do is single click on it with the left mouse button, and every single cell is selected. And if you want to deselect that, you just click on any cell, and now we just have one cell selected. The other way to do it, if you like using keyboard shortcuts, is to hold down the Control key on the keyboard and then press the A button. And that'll do the same exact thing. It selects every single cell. So now I can come along and say, make everything bold if I want. Or to come over to the font area and maybe change the font to something else. Now, every single cell, all 17 billion plus of them, they've now been formatted exactly the way I just did. And of course, you can just deselect again by just clicking on one cell. Now, another thing that I want to go over before we start our project is saving. All right? You don't want to know how to do all this work just to say, I don't know how to save, or I did save it, but I don't know where I put my file. Because many times you don't get something done in one sitting. You're going to have to work on it. Something comes up, so you want to save, maybe close out of Excel, maybe shut down the computer altogether. Later you go back, whether it's later that day, later that week, later that month, later that year sometimes. And, where did I put that file? Okay. Easy enough. By default, Excel uses book 1 as a sort of placeholder for the title of our file. We didn't save it yet. We did all this kind of playing around, getting used to the pointers, but what if we want to save this file? Well, that's easy enough. All the way in the top right, we have our quick access toolbar. and we're going to click on our little floppy disk, and that will take us to the Save As section. It's taking us to Save As because we didn't save it in the first place. Subsequent saves, we won't have to do this. It'll just save the file that's there, but this first time we have to actually save the file by giving it a location and a title. Well, there's a number of places where you can actually save a file. And in order to see where they are, we can click on our Browse Manila folder right here. Now this opens up a dialog box, and there's a few places you can save this. This defaults to Documents, which is a very reasonable place to save it, right? It is a document. It's a specific document. It's an Excel document, but it's a document nonetheless, and you can store your Excel files here, your Word files, your PDFs, whatever you may have, you can store them in your Documents folder. Another good place for them is your desktop. So this way, as soon as you turn on your computer, it'll just be sitting there at your desktop before any applications are open or anything like that. It serves as a good reminder, hey, this is where my file is. I have to work on that, so let me click on it to open it back up and get back to working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to save it to my Documents folder. So I'm going to click on Documents, and you can see on top here, I'm back in my Documents folder. Now my file name is Book 1, not a very useful title, doesn't really tell me anything about it, so 3 years from now if I look at this, I'm not going to know what that is. So I'm going to left click where it says Book 1, and you can see the entire thing is selected in blue. Well, that's a good sign. We don't have to do anything else here. We can just type right over that and give it a more fitting name. Perhaps we can call this something like Excel Practice. Right? And we can hit the Save button. And you can see our Book 1 has been renamed Excel Practice. So every single time we have to start this file back up again, open it back up and continue working on it, we just go to our Documents folder. That file will be sitting there. We can double click and pick up right where we left off. But right now, those are the main pointers I want to show you. There's still a couple more, but they're not going to be applicable for this class. And I'm fully aware that's a lot of information. Maybe information overload. So if you feel the need, by every means, just pause the video, go back, review this part again, play around with it a little bit on your own, become comfortable with this. Also keep in mind, when we work on our project, we're going to use these exact techniques. These are the very things that will unlock the skills that you need to comfortably navigate and accomplish goals in Excel. So it's crucial that we get through this. Like I said, review them at your own pace, pause the video, but we're also going to go through them again, not only when we work on a project, but it'll be reinforced throughout the various Excel classes that we offer at the library. So every new class will have new material, but there's also a built-in review as well. So now with the skills that we have, we can work on our project. What we're going to do is we're going to create an annual budget with a number of sources of income and a number of expenses. And for any one particular month, we're going to add up all those incomes, and we're going to add up all those expenses, and we're going to take the difference between the two. This way we can see if we saved money that month, lost money that month, or broke even. Right? So in order to do that, we're going to start with a brand new worksheet. So in order to get to that, we're going to go to our File tab all the way on the top right. This is just below our Save button. And we're going to left click on that, and we're going to go to New. And we're going to have a whole bunch of options when they finally load up. It's just going to take a second. Okay, but we're going to go to Blank Workbook. Okay, so now we have a whole brand new worksheet. You can see book 1 again. That's our default title. And what we're going to do is we're going to discuss how we want to present this information. This is for us. This is so that it makes sense to us, and also so that it makes sense to Excel. And you'll see what that means as we go through it. So the first thing we want to do is we want to give it a title. So it defaults to selecting cell A1. So we can just start typing, and a good title is personal budget. Right? And then we can hit enter. Now what I want to do is I want to leave just a little bit of space here. I want to go down to cell A4. And this will make sense in 1 second. But right here what I want to do is I want to put in our sources of income. So we're going to type in cell A4 wages and hit enter. And then we're going to type interest and then hit enter. And then miscellaneous, we could just abbreviate MISC. And we'll have that be the 3 sources of income. And below that, we can put income totals. And then hit enter. Now that is all of our income. What I want to do now is below that, I want to put in our expenses. Well, easy enough. But I don't want to put it directly below that. I want to keep a space. Right? The same way we kept a little space on top here, I want to keep a little space below here. So I'm going to hit enter one more time. And I'm going to start at cell A9, and now I'm going to start putting in our expenses. So we'll put in housing and hit enter, and then utilities, and then food. And then we'll just do another miscellaneous. And we'll just keep it simple at that, right? I mean, you get the idea. If there's more or less sources of income and expenses, you could just, add them accordingly when you do this on your own. But for what we're doing here, we'll just keep it short and sweet. So those will be all of our expenses. And we'll hit enter one more time. And we'll put expenses totals. So we have our title, our personal budget. We have 3 sources of income. We have a place for our income totals. And we have 4 sources for expenses. And we have our expenses totals. Now, I want to skip one more space and go to A15, because this is another section here that we're working on. We have our income, we have our expenses. We want to have room for the difference between those two. So I'll title this cell income minus expenses. Right? So this should have a little bit of a structure to it, as in we can see our title, our incomes, our expenses, and then our difference, right? So we have our title, and then one section, a second section, and a third section. This is not only good for our eyes to be able to distinguish these 3 sort of chunks of data that we want to present, but it will help when we start doing things with it, because we have to add our numbers in over here and do some calculations. We're going to play around with a formula. So when that information starts piling up, we want to separate it out, not only for our eyes to say, okay, here are my expenses, here are my income sources, here are my expense sources, et cetera, et cetera. We want everything to be together. We don't want any spaces between our incomes. We don't want any spaces between our expenses. We want them to be put together because it'll help with Excel doing some of the calculations for us. Now, we have all the words here, but we're doing this over time. We're doing this over an entire year, so we want to include 12 months, right? Well, a good place to put that is in cell B3, Because if we start with January right here, we can put all of January's income here, all of the expenses for January here, and take the difference between the two and put it here. And then of course we could do the same for February, March, etc., etc. So let's put the months in our chart as well. I'm sorry, in our worksheet. So we'll start with January. And if you remember, we have our autofill pointer. All we have to do is go over to the bottom right of that cell, get our little black plus sign, and drag across. So if you go over to column M, that should fill in the 12 months for the year. Now, you can see we have the same problem in column A that we had when we were dealing with the days of the week. We had Wednesday take up more space than the default size of the column. And that's what's happening with personal budget. You can see it's all visible here, but it kind of bleeds into the second column. Well, we can see with a formula bar, personal budget is there. It's in column A, cell A1 specifically. That's what I have selected. But the same thing happens with income totals, expense totals, income minus expenses. It just overlaps too much. Well, we know how to fix that. We're going to make column A a little bit wider. So remember, we're going to search for our down arrow. Now that's to select the entire column, so we're not going to do that. But once we get that, we can hover over to the right a little bit, and then you see it change again to our little pointer that has the left and right arrows. Now you remember, if you double click right here, it'll make it as wide as the largest item that you have in one of those cells in that column. So if I double click, it looks like it's making it as wide as it needs to display income minus expenses. And if you want to, of course, you could always click and drag accordingly. It'll do the same exact thing, right? Now, this should make some sense here, right? So for January, here's where our income will go. Here's where our expenses will go. And then the difference between the two will go there. And of course, we could repeat that for February, all the way down, all the way through to November and December. But if you remember, I mean, we just auto-filled all this information here. When we start filling in all of this with numbers and start adding up our income, adding up our expenses, taking the difference, we don't have to do that 12 times. We really only have to do that for January. Once all the data is filled in, the actual calculation for their total for all the sources of income, we can just do that with a formula. Just one time, and then auto-fill that all the way across to December. And we can do the same exact thing for our expenses. Once we have all of our data filled in for all of our expenses, we're just adding up January's. And then we're going to autofill. And so really, we're only doing the work one time. And then letting Excel do it the rest for us, basically. But the thing is, we have to do a couple things first. One is make sure we put in all the necessary data, right? All that actual information. So, you know, what are our wages for January and our miscellaneous for June, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Fill in all that information. Then we can let Excel work its magic. So what we can do is we can start filling in some information here. And again, I'm still just going to focus on January here because I'm just making up some numbers. I'm not making any claim that they're accurate to today's crazy economy. But we're going to work with some simple numbers just to get some straightforward answers. And we're just going to do some data entry here. So for January's wages, that'll be cell B4. We're going to put in 2,500, 2500. Notice no indication of money here. Now we know it's money, but there's no dollar sign, there's no decimal point, there's no cents after the dollar sign. It's just 2,500, not 2,500.00. That we'll handle later when we do the formatting. Our goal here is to get the data in the worksheet, get the calculations, make sure everything is correct, then we can kind of fine tune it to the way we want. So right now we're just focusing on putting in information. So for January, our wages are $2,500, and then we'll just keep it simple. Say our interest is 0, and then for miscellaneous, we'll do the same thing. Now, we'll skip the income totals because we have to actually add this up, and we'll do that in a little bit. We'll jump down to expenses. So we're still in January, cell B9. What was the expense for housing in January? Well, let's go with $1,500 and then hit enter. And for utilities, we'll go with $175. And then for food, we'll put $600. And miscellaneous, we'll just put 0 again. Now, we have a lot more to put in here, a lot more data entry for income and for expenses. Realistically, you would put in accurate information. You would say, okay, in February, we had a certain amount for wages, we had a certain amount for interest, right? And every month you would fill it in accordingly when you have those numbers. But for the purposes of saving some time here and to save some unnecessary typing, because this isn't really about being able to type and do the data entry, we're going to use our autofill again. Now, if you remember from before, we had to provide 2 numbers for Excel to see that pattern. We wanted to add those first 10 numbers up. And when we just gave it the number 1, it just repeated the number 1 9 more times. But as soon as we gave it the number 2, it took the 1 and the 2 and said, oh, okay, I know what you mean. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, in this case, we actually don't want it to vary too much here. We'll put in some variation here, but really what I want to do is I want to just copy all of this, all of these numbers, all across to December, and then we can just pick certain areas to change. It's just a nice quick way of putting in some kind of dummy values basically, and then we can work with that. So the quick way of doing this is, well, we already did the work. We have all this stuff here. So what I want to do is I want to autofill without actually changing any of this content. I want to keep this uniform all the way across to December, and then we'll just cherry pick certain things and change them accordingly. So this is just going to be one big autofill, and we can do it for all of this at once. Yes, you can pick on just 2,500, go to the corner here, drag across, and just 2,500 will be there. And you could repeat the same thing with the 0, do the same thing with this 0, right? That would work. But what's really nice is if we just click on that 2,500 and drop all the way down to that last cell, B12, and make sure that all of them are selected, we can autofill all of this in one move. So we're going to go down to the bottom right again, get that little black plus, and click and drag across to December, column M. And what that does is it just autofills every single line. So all the 2,500s repeat, all the zeros repeat, all these particular zeros repeat, all the way down the line. Now, we have to add up these incomes, add up these expenses. If we just leave it at this, every month will be exactly the same, which isn't very useful or meaningful. So we're just going to make a couple of changes here and there just to mix up what these totals are. Okay, so we have the bulk of what we want, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to July's wages, which is cell H4, and I'm just going to type right over that 2,500, and I'm going to make it 0. So there was no income, no wages as a source of income in July. And then I'm going to do the same exact thing for August. They're both 0. Excuse me. And then I'm going to go to October, and I'm going to click on cell K5. and that's going to be the interest for October, and I'm going to change that from 0 to 35. And then finally, for the income changes, we're going to go to April, and we're going to go to miscellaneous, and we're just going to put 15, 15, right? Just to keep it a little different, mix it up a little bit. And then for expenses, we're only going to change in the middle. We're going to go to June for the utilities, which is cell G10, and instead of 175, we're going to change it to 200. And then we're going to do that again for July, 200, and we're going to change it again for August, 200. Right? So at this point, we should have everything that we need as far as just pure data entry. And what I want to do is I want to save this file. So what we're going to do is we're going to click on our Save button. Remember, Quick Access Toolbar, top left-hand side of the screen. Click on Save. It takes us to Save As. This is just like when we saved the other document. We're going to click on Browse. And you can see our other document is under the Documents folder, Excel Practice. And I'm going to type a good title name for this, a good file name for this. So let's just call it Annual Budget 2023, right? And then I'm going to click Save. So now Annual Budget 2023 is our title. And what you can do here, if you need a little more time to make sure this is perfect, you can pause the video and just make sure that you have everything exactly, not only where it is, but the right values as well, just to make sure that we're on the same page here, because I want all these values to be uniform for everybody who's watching this video, because we're going to start doing some calculations where we add up things and take some differences, and I want to make sure we have the right numbers going in. So if you need a minute, this is a good time to pause the video, make sure that all this is 100%, and then we can get back to work. So with that in mind, we have all of our information here, but now we need to do some calculations with it, right? Because Excel is a lot more than just data entry and filling in information in this nice smooth way where we can just autofill stuff, right? What we need to do is we need to start adding up these values. And we're just going to focus on January. Remember, our main focus is going to be right here. We'll worry about the other 11 months later. Well, we have our income totals here. So we're in cell B7. So what can we do here? Well, if we have all of our individual wages here, and this is our income totals, obviously we want to add up these three numbers and put the answer here, right? And then of course we would want to do the same thing with our expenses down here where our expense totals is. We would want to add up all of our expenses for January and have the same idea, the same thing to go there. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to show you a few ways. The first way I'm going to show you is not a good way of doing it. And then I'll show you two better ways. So this first one you can just watch. Now, every time we do a formula, it's going to start with the equal sign. So no matter what you're doing, you're always going to do that first. So we're going to make sure we're in the proper cell. So we want our January totals to be right here in cell B7. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hit the equal sign. Now, this is an example of what not to do. We know we want to add up these three values. So you might be inclined to say, okay, I'm going to take the 2,500, and then what am I doing? I'm adding. So I'm going to hit the plus sign on my keyboard, and then the next number, the interest, is 0. Okay, so I'm just going to type in a 0. And the next number after that, the miscellaneous, is also 0. So I'm going to hit the plus sign one more time and hit 0. Now this doesn't look wrong because I'm saying that this cell should be equal to 2,500 plus 0 plus 0, which is exactly what we want. Well, when I hit the enter key, I don't get any errors, right? There's nothing on the screen saying that there's some type of problem. It clearly added it properly, right? 2500 plus 0 is 2500. But the problem with that is, if I come along and say, oh wait, I made a mistake, I want this 2500 to be 2700, that's easy enough of a fix. But now I have to go over here and change this to 2700. I don't want that, especially when you have more complex spreadsheets where you don't just have this particular field, this particular cell dependent on just these three other ones. You can have very complicated things where one cell is dependent on this cell, on that cell, on the other cell, and a lot of things can change all at once just by changing the value of one cell. So that's not really going to work for us. Turns out Excel doesn't know that these three numbers here, the 2500, 0, and 0, are these three numbers. We know that, but it doesn't. Well, okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo that. So we're back to 2500 for wages, and there's nothing in the income totals for January for that cell. I'm going to show you a second way of doing it. What we're going to do is, and this one we can do together. I'm going to hit my equal sign again. And what I'm going to do is, instead of typing in the values, I'm going to click on the cell itself. So if I want it to consider whatever is in cell B4, I'm going to click on that cell. And you can see that there's the little marquee, or the marching ants it's called, where there's these little dots going around the cell that I clicked on. Now we're on to something, because now it says that cell B7, where we want our totals to go, it's currently equal to whatever's in cell B4. And you can see that up here too in a formula bar. Now we can hit our plus sign again, right? Well, what do we want to add the contents of cell B4 to? We want to add it to whatever's in B5. So now we get another color with another box. So now it equals B4 plus B5. Well, we have one more to do, so we're going to hit our plus sign again. And we want to add it to this last cell, our January miscellaneous. So now it's equal to whatever's in B4 added to whatever's in B5 added to whatever's in B6. Well, that looks good, so we're going to hit enter. Perfect. Now we got the same answer as we did before, 2500, but now we're referencing the cell instead of what's in it. Well, this is a significant step in the right direction, because if I come along again and say, hey, that's not 2500, it's 2700, and now I hit enter, not only does the one cell change, but so does the other one, because it's still just adding whatever's in B4. So we can change that to anything, and it'll automatically update whatever the total is. So that's a significantly better way of doing it, and there are times when you do have to do it that way, right? So this is a completely valid way of doing it, but I want to show you a third way. So we're going to undo again, and make sure you hit undo until you have 2500, 0, 0, and blank. Okay. Now, that's just what it is. That's just adding up those values one at a time. But remember, I said we wanted to deliberately put certain things together, like all of our incomes, all of our expenses, right? Well, that's not just for us, it's for Excel, because we have this thing here called AutoSum, and it's extremely convenient. This is actually much easier than having to click on individual cells and manually put in that plus sign. All you have to do is say, okay, I want to add up these cells. Fair enough. Where do I want that to go? Well, we're going to select B7 again, because that's where we want our total to go, just like it went in the past. But instead of doing all that equal sign and clicking on stuff and doing all that, we're just going to go to our Home tab, look at our ribbon, go all the way to the right, and you'll see there's something called AutoSum. So let's click on that. Now this just did a lot for us. It created our equal sign for us, put in SUM for sum, and it gave us this range of values, B4, and then there's a colon B6. That's B4 through B6. So it's saying anything that's in cell B4, B5, and B6 is going to be added. Okay, well that's easy enough. That looks good. It doesn't just give you the answer, it gives you the ability to preview before you bottom line this. Well, it looks okay, so we can hit enter. And now it gives us our 2,500. Well, that's great because not only is that even faster than the last way we did it, it still works when I change things to 2,700. Not only does this change the January wages, but so do the income totals, just like before, but now it's a lot faster. But the reason why that works is because it's contiguous. See, everything is together, and that was deliberate. So not only is it important that we do this for our sake and say, okay, I want all the incomes together and I want all the expenses together, right? And we can just kind of see that because of the space that's right here. It also helps with Excel, because if there were a space here somewhere, it would just stop at that particular point. So you want to try to aim for something like this. It's just as far as considering how you want to design your various spreadsheets that you use. Now, we did all this and we finally got our total for January, our $2,700 of income. Of course, we can just go to cell C7 for February, auto sum, hit enter, March, auto sum, hit enter, etc., etc., or we can just autofill. Well, we know how to do that. We go to B7, the cell we've been working on for a while now, go to the bottom right, get our little black plus sign, left click on the mouse, hold that down, drag across. And you can see it created totals for each of those months. Now this is why I deliberately changed certain things, because you can see there's no income here for July and August, and we have 0 here. That shows me that the formula changed for each respective column. You can see our very first one was B4 to B6, but if I go to July, you could see it's changed from H4 to H6, as it should have because it's in column H. So this autofill is very smart. It doesn't just copy that formula rigidly. It knows enough to say, hey, if this is column B4 to B6, this one must be C4 to C6, etc., all the way to December, which is M4 to M6. So it'll change accordingly. Now, with all that in mind, expenses should be even easier. It doesn't matter that there's 4 of them, right? We're just going to go to where our expenses totals are and go to, so that's cell B13, right? Make sure that's selected. And we're going to go to our auto sum again, right? And we're just going to click on that because our goal is to add up these 4 values. And there you go. Look how smart Excel is. It equals the sum of everything between B9 and B12. Well, here's B9, 10, 11, 12. Now notice we kept a space here, so it didn't jump up and include January's income sources, right? So that space is kind of important. If not, it's not a big deal because you could always just click on the particular cells you want and drag down and make sure that you do include exactly what you want, in case it does go a little wild and include things you don't want. That'll happen in the 102 class though, not here. But in case it ever does that, you could always just click on the cells you want and drag down. And as long as this looks okay, then you're good to go. So that's exactly what we want to add up. So we're going to hit enter and we get our total. So this is $2,275 worth of expenses for just January. And of course, we know what to do here. We're going to autofill across for the other 11 months. So we're going to just make sure that B13 is selected. Get in the bottom right-hand corner. Click and drag across. And now we have all of our expenses. So the next thing we have is our income minus expenses to work on. But first I'm actually going to save this because we did a lot of work. So to deal with this last part here, we're concerned with our income totals and our expense totals. So what we're going to do is we're going to start in cell B15, because remember we're only concerned with January here, and we're going to have to use a formula here. So we're going to start with our equal sign, and we're looking at the difference between our income and our expense totals. Now there's no auto sum equivalent here, so we're going to have to use our second method where we individually click on the cells, and that's not a big deal, right? But what we're going to do is we have our equal sign, and we're looking at cell B7 for our income totals, so we'll just click on that, and you can see it's selected for us, and cell B15 has equals B7, right? So we're definitely doing something right here, and what we want to do is subtract it from our expense totals. So we're going to add the minus sign, and then we'll click on cell B13, which is our expense totals for January, and we can look at our formula here. So it equals B7 minus B13. So whatever's in cell B7, or 2700, will be subtracted from whatever's in cell B13, which is our 2275. And of course we could always take a look visually and see our blue box and our red box, and we know that this blue cell here is being subtracted from this red cell here. So that looks good, so we can hit enter, and we get 425. And just like we've done before, we can just autofill all the way across to December, and we get all 12 of our differences, one for each month. And you can see in the beginning we saved some money and maybe a little less, but then by the time we got to July and August, we actually spent more than we brought in, because those were the months where we had no wages coming in. So this is a full year worth of data, all of our income, all of the income totals, all of the expenses and the expense totals, and their difference, all for every month, so we can see in pretty good detail here exactly what was coming in financially, what was going out, and for any month whether we made money or lost money or maybe broke even. Now this is all well and good. We did all of our data entry, all of our calculations. All that's left though is to format. Now formatting involves a lot of things here. It's, adding color to it, it's drawing lines around the cells. There's a few things that can get done, and it's not so much important to do it precisely the way that I'm doing it, but just to be aware of what can be done, so that even if you don't like the colors I use, and maybe you don't want to draw any lines around the cells to make anything stand out or make something bold or anything like that, there's nothing that says you have to do it, but at least you know those things are there, so you can do it the way that you would like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some color to this first and foremost. I have personal budget in cell A1, so what I want to do is I want to add a little color to it. So I'm going to go over to my home tab. We have our font group, and we have our fill color. That's our paint can that defaults to yellow. Well, next to that is a little drop down, so I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to look for a color that is a little dark but not too dark. Just trying to find something here. So I'll go with this. I'll go with light blue. So I click on that, and we have light blue there. Now I'm also going to do something similar with the income totals, the expense totals, and the income minus expenses, because those numbers in particular I want to stand out, because there are totals and there are differences for any particular month. So I really want that to pop out more than anything else. So what I'll do is I'll use my select pointer. I'm going to click on cell A7. That's where income totals is written, and I'm going to click and drag across until I get all of the values for income totals for every month. All right, so the 12 numbers plus income total, so 13 cells total. And what I'll do is I'll click on that little down arrow next to fill color. And what I want is I want something that's kind of like a lighter version of what I've used for the title. So maybe something like that. Like I'll use the blue accent 5 lighter 80%. Very specific title that just rolls off the tongue. All right, so I'll put that there, and you can see it's right there. And then I'm going to do the same thing with expense totals on row 13. I'm going to select all of those values that go along with that. And you can see it holds on to that last color. So I'm just going to click on that again. I don't have to do the drop down. I can just click the paint can. So now I have that there. And I'm going to do the same thing with income minus expenses. I'm going to do the same thing. So this way, all three of those pop out right away. Another thing that I'd like to do is I would like to make not only all of these bold, the parts that we just added a fill color to, I'd like to do that with the months as well. So we're just selecting here again, we're clicking and dragging it across, and I'm going to make the months bold. And then I'm just going to select again, we're over our income totals, and I'm going to make that bold. And then I'm just going to keep repeating that, expense totals, make that bold. And finally do the same thing with income minus expenses, all those values, make those bold. All right, so you can see it just pops out a little bit more. Another thing you may have noticed is that all of the words, anything we've typed up here in column A and all of our months, they all pull to the right. They're all right justified. But all the numbers, I'm sorry, they pull to the left rather. They all pull to the left-hand side of each cell. But all the numbers, they pull to the right. Now that's all well and good, but for me, I prefer it where everything is centered. So I want all of this stuff centered. Now I could either click and drag and select everything and then just center align it, or if you remember, we can always go over here to that little gray triangle, click on that, and this selects every cell, and then I can click on center align. And now not only these cells are centered, but if I decide to expand out and do maybe another part of the spreadsheet here for another year, this is already formatted to be centered as well, in advance. So either of those would work. You could either select everything that we've done, or select every single cell and just hit the center button. That'll work just the same. Another thing that I want to do is make room for everything. So we already expanded column A out so that income minus expenses is completely visible, but you can see with the months we're fine until about September, and then September, November, and December, they could use a little bit of spacing there. So we'll make column J a little bit bigger, right? So we'll go over to the right there, right between J and K, get our left and right arrow there, click and drag out a little bit, maybe a little bit more. Right? I'm going to do the same thing with November, except when I'm between L and M here, I'm just going to double click. Right? That guarantees it's exactly as much space as the word November needs. And then I'll do the same thing between M and N for December. Right? Another thing that we can do is take all of these numbers and give them a format of currency, because remember, we know that this is $2,700 and $175, but it's not noted that way. Well, all right, easy enough to fix. So we're going to start in cell B4, where our first number is our 2,700, And we're going to use our select pointer to click and drag all the way through until we get to M15. That should be where 225 is, all the way in the corner. And we should have all of this stuff selected. Now there are some white cells here with no content in them. That's okay. We don't have to worry about that. The important thing is that the numbers themselves will be formatted. And to do that, we're still under our home tab. We have our number group, and we have our $sign right here. So all we have to do is click that $sign, and this did some stuff for us here. If you noticed, it ever so slightly increased the columns because we have more space for these numbers now. We don't just have 2700, we have a $sign, we have a 2, we have the comma, 700, and then 0.00 added at the end. And it did that with everything. Any 4-digit number, it added the comma automatically. For every number, it added the $sign, and it added the decimal point with 2 zeros at the end. Now, if you don't want that for whatever reason, perhaps you're only concerned with the dollars and not the cents, well, right next to our $sign for formatting, if you go over a little bit, we have these two buttons here for decrease decimal and increase decimal. Well, if you want to decrease the decimal, you just click on this button. Actually, we have to select everything first. Let's make sure that we have this selected, right? Because you have to select a cell before you can format it. And we can click on decrease decimal, and you see one decimal disappeared. And then we do it one more time, and now we have no decimals, no numbers after the decimal. So maybe that's all you're concerned with. Maybe you just want to see the top level, you know, like $2,700. Maybe you don't care about the 50 cents over the course of a year. But if you do want that, you could always go right next to it to increase decimal, press that button 2 times, and it gets you back your 2 decimal places. The one thing too to consider is when there's a 0 with this particular formatting, instead of having a 0, it changes it to just a dash. And when there's something negative, if you remember, right, we had no income for July and August. These were negative 2,300. Instead, they'll put parentheses around them, right? So that's just part of the formatting. Now the last thing that I want to do is I want to draw a border around the income part and the expense part, because we already separated them out with some spaces. But I want to further reinforce that by putting a border around each individual section. And we can do that by selecting all the content that's below the months up to income totals. So this is basically all of our income information, the wages, interest, miscellaneous, and totals. All that information can be selected. And again, we're still under our home tab. On the font group, we have our borders. It's right above here, right above the word font. Now if you hit the drop down there, this gives you a bunch of options. So if I click on all borders, that's going to draw a border around each cell that's selected. So I'm going to click on that, and you can see a black outline around everything. Now I'm going to do that same exact thing, but I'm going to do it just for the expense total information. And you can see it remembers our all borders, so we don't have to hit our drop down. We just click on that. And perhaps for good measure, we do the same thing for income minus expenses. Right. Now, I've taught this in class, and some people like the borders. Some people dislike them. Some people like them, but they like a different version of them. So, you know, you can select a specific area and say, like, well, you know, maybe I don't really want that much of a border. Maybe I only want it for like here, and I'll leave the this alone. I'll only accentuate the totals a little bit more, something like that. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be exactly this, but this is the kind of idea behind it. You can pick whatever colors you want. You can put whatever border you want, or not put a border. You could make things bold. You can not make things bold. You can underline them or not underline them. The idea is to do it the way you want to do it, and to know what tools that you're going to utilize in order to accomplish that goal. I'm just going to save one more time because, again, we did a whole lot of work. Now, what we have here is a completed annual budget. This is a whole bunch of sources of income, a whole bunch of sources for expenses, the totals for both of them, and the difference between the income and the expenses for every single month in a year. So that's a lot of work. That involved a lot of typing, involved calculating, involved a lot of formatting. And the idea is that if you can do this, you can apply this to a lot of other basic Excel spreadsheets. It's not just for doing budgets. You can apply this to a lot of things, both in your professional life and your personal life. I want to thank you for watching this video on Excel 101. We have a number of other computer classes that we have all year round, and a number of other programs that we feature at the Poughkeepsie Public Library. And if you'd like to sign up for any of them, you can go to our website, pokelib.org, POKLIB.org, and you can look for the events button and click on the first option, calendar of events and programs. And you can look through our catalog, and many things you can just show up for, but certain things you'll have to sign up for. So if there's something that has the register button next to it, you would just click on it and put in the relevant information and submit it. We also have a number of labs that are just for computers, any computer questions that you might have. They're Monday through Friday, 11 to 1 at the Adrian's Library, specifically in the Marcotte Lab. We also have one Tuesday nights in the same location from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. And on Thursdays, we're at Boardman Road from 1 to 3 p.m. Now, again, I want to thank you for everything you've done. I appreciate you watching the video. I encourage you to practice this. If you have any questions, my information is displayed on the screen, and you can feel free to email me, call me, drop by the labs, and I'd be happy to help you with whatever questions you have. Thank you very much, and have a good day.